In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to set up a file using white ink with CMYK in Illustrator CC for the HP Indigo 7900 press. This design only uses white ink and CMYK and not any other specialty inks. Now before we get started, I'll point out that many times a design using white ink will be shown to a client as a client proof, and usually it will have a layer simulating a dark color of paper so the client can see how the design will look once it's printed. But in order to submit a press-ready file to TPSi, please delete or turn off this layer so we aren't accidentally printing a base layer of CMYK ink on an already colored paper. Also, be sure you don't have multiple designs placed as PDFs on a single artboard. You need to have every single design on its own artboard properly sized to the dimensions of that design. If you're unsure how to set that up, please see our video on how to set up proper crops and bleeds and proofing your PDF files in Illustrator CC. In order to set up white ink, we're going to be using three main panels: the Layers panel, the Swatches panel, and the Attributes panel. If any of these panels are not already visible, you can bring them up by simply going to Window in the menu bar and selecting whichever panels you need to appear. As you can see for my design, I have the front of a grand opening postcard we'll be using for our example. I already have my design created in this single CMYK layer. Now if I print the CMYK directly onto my dark substrate, the colors are not going to stand out. They're just going to sink into my dark substrate, especially since it's an uncoated paper. If I want this to stay vibrant and bright, the press is going to need to put a layer of white ink underneath the CMYK. So let's set up our layers first. I have my design in a single CMYK layer, but if you have several layers of CMYK elements, that's fine to leave them in those layers, but we need to make sure we have a layer just for white ink. Go to the Layers panel and create a new layer and make sure that it's the top layer. Double-click on that and it'll pull up a panel where you can rename it. Type in white ink exactly the way I have it here. This is case sensitive. If you spell it any other way, it won't work because this is the labeling that we've used to program our HP Indigo 7900. Now don't let this throw you, but remember earlier when I said we need to put a layer of white ink underneath our CMYK layer in order to get the color to show up and stay vibrant? That still needs to happen, but our Indigo press is programmed in a specific way. It needs to read that white ink layer as the top layer. I know that seems counterintuitive, but that's just the way our press is programmed. When it goes to print, it will lay the white ink layer down first, then the CMYK on top of it, even though it's going to look backwards when we are finished setting this up. Okay, so now that we have the layer named, let's create a white ink swatch. Go to your Swatches panel and click the drop-down menu in the upper right corner. Select New Swatch, and the new swatch panel will appear. Name this exactly the same way you named your layer, white ink. Again, this is case sensitive and specific to our press. Under Color Type, select Spot. Under Color Mode, make sure that it's CMYK. Now go to your sliders and create a color that you want to use for your white ink. At TPSi, we generally use 100% magenta as our white ink spot color, but you can use anything you like as long as it isn't 100% K. The press isn't looking for the color of the swatch, it's looking for the swatch to be a spot color that's labeled white ink. Once you've got your color, click OK. You know you have your white ink swatch properly loaded if you see a black dot in the lower right-hand corner of your swatch. I would also recommend deleting all the extra swatches in your Swatches panel except for the ones that you're using in your design and the white ink swatch. Now once you have your design completed, also make sure that you have all of your type converted to outlines. To do that, just select all your text, go to Type, and select Create Outlines. Now take all of your elements that you want to create a base of white ink for, group them, and then copy and paste them into the white ink layer. In my example, I don't have any elements that I'm leaving as purely white ink, so I'm selecting all of my text and this coral artwork, grouping it, and then copying and pasting it into my white ink layer. Once I have that done, I'm going to make sure that it lines up directly over my CMYK layer, and then I'm going to apply that white ink swatch to it. Now, if you have a design where you want to apply a transparency of white ink to certain elements, you can still do that by selecting those elements, applying the white ink swatch, and then setting your transparency slider to whatever you choose. Since I'm not using that in this design, I'm going to change that back. Now go to the Attributes panel and select Overprint Fill. Now if your design has strokes, you'll also select the Overprint stroke unless it's grayed out. And if it's grayed out, don't worry about it and just select Overprint Fill. Now save your file as a native Illustrator file. Next, you want to save your file as a PDF. At TPSi, we prefer having files submitted as PDFs. It's only if we have to troubleshoot your file will we ask you for the native file. To save as a PDF, go to Save As, and you'll see the Save As panel appear. Name your file, where you want to save it to, and in the Format drop-down menu, select Adobe PDF. Now the Save Adobe PDF panel will appear in the General Settings category. In order to get the best color output on our Indigo 7900, we ask that you change the PDF settings. In the preset, instead of the default entry, open up this drop-down menu and select Press Quality. In the standard drop-down menu, select PDF X4 2010. You'll notice in the Compatibility field, it will automatically change to Acrobat 7 PDF 1.6 or higher. Under the Option settings, go ahead and deselect the Preserve Illustrator Editing Capabilities. Leaving this checked will unnecessarily bloat the size of your file. And you can leave these last two boxes checked. Now we're going to move out of the General Settings into the Marks and Bleeds settings. At TPSi, we ask that you only check the trim marks under the Printer's Marks section. Don't use any of these other settings. In the Bleed section, use Document Bleed settings if you have a bleed. Click the Save PDF and you should see your PDF open up. I'm using Adobe Acrobat DC. Even if you have an earlier version of Acrobat, you should still have the settings we're getting ready to look at. Now we're going to proof your file to make sure it will print correctly. Once you have your PDF open, you should see your trim marks and the designated bleed area if you have a bleed. Once you've seen that those are set correctly, go to Tools and look for Print Production. Open up that section and then look for Output Preview. You'll notice right away that a panel will open up, and the only thing I want you to pay attention to is the separation section at the bottom of the panel. You'll notice it will show you all the process plates as well as the spot plates. If you have your file set up correctly, you should see a white ink spot color listed under the spot plates. You'll also notice that it's at 0%, so you'll need to take your cursor and start moving it over areas where you've applied the white ink. Now you should see it registered at 100% in areas you've assigned it to 100%, and if you assigned it a transparency percentage, you'll see it register as that transparency percentage. If all of this is reading correctly, then that's it. Your file is ready to send to us for printing.